we need to start looking at vaccines like products being injected into our body and understanding what is in that product and whether or not we really need it. The government has bought into the multi-generational indoctrination of vaccines are safe, effective, harmless, and necessary. Maybe we should start to more thoroughly examine and question the rest of the injections that are on that schedule. It's a gift of COVID that we learned how dastardly our government was.
This is Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pags.
I got to be honest with you. I'm not really sure what a vaccine is anymore. I thought I knew, but then they changed the definition of a vaccine. I know growing up, we were all to get the smallpox vaccine, which I somehow was immune to, so I don't have that circle on my arm. But I know that the polio vaccine allegedly saved my dad's life back in the day. I thought a vaccine was you took it, it stopped you from getting whatever this communicable disease is. And it turns out that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, we've been lied to about so-called vaccines a lot over the past 5 years, but certainly 25 or 30 years, even beyond that. Let me get with Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, drtenpenny.com. Go get her book. It's called Zero Accountability in a Failed System, How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. Doctor, how are you? Nice to meet you.
I'm great. Nice to meet you too.
So growing up, and again, I'm way older than you are. I'm 59 now, and I remember hearing about vaccines. I remember hearing about how good they were. I remember hearing we had to get a couple when we were kids, and it wasn't like you got to schedule like 75 vaccines now or shots that people are taking. It's just a different world. How did we get here, do you think? What changed between 1966 when I was born and here we are in 2025?
The biggest change was the institution of the 1986 National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, because that gave the pharmaceutical companies complete liability for all of their products. In fact, they're the only industry probably in the world that can make a product, and if it hurts you, harms you, or even kills you, they have no liability for it whatsoever. And so when that happened in 1986, starting in 1991, we had what we called the big ramp up of the schedule. And when they started at hepatitis B at birth and the Hib vaccine, and then shortly after that was Prevnar, and then the chickenpox vaccine, vitamin A, and on and on and on. 2006 was Gardasil. And so they could continue to make products, give them to every children. The government got involved. The government is the largest purchaser of vaccines, individual purchasers. They approve them, they put them on the schedule, they buy them, they distribute them, they protect the pharmaceutical industry from liability, they do all the marketing, and not only do they do marketing, they mandate that you to get these vaccines so that you have very few choices to say no. So all of that happened after 1986. In fact, up through 1985, there were only 3 vaccines. So what you and I were exposed to was the MMR, the DPT, and the polio vaccine.
Right.
That was what was approved in 1986. And since that time, we now get multiple doses of multiple vaccines, and they're continuing to make more all the time.
It seems to me that we're fine. I'm reasonably healthy. I'm guessing you are as well. We're still alive this many years later. We were not somehow in danger because we didn't have 75 different shots. And I get from a business aspect why they would want to have no liability. Duh. And I also know why Reagan did it. I talked to Del Bigtree the other day. He said Reagan did that in 86 because basically the pharmaceutical company said, well, we'll just stop making vaccines, period. And what if there's a bio attack or something? Then Big Pharma's not going to help us out. They use this very strange leverage to get that done. But the question I really have is, what weight does the pharmaceutical company have to make me take a shot? Like you said, the government buys the shots, I get it. But even the government, constitutionally, I don't think, can tell me I have to take a shot. There was some case back in 1907 in Connecticut where the guy lost and the government had the right to either give him the shot for whatever it was, the Spanish flu, or he had to pay a $5 fine. I'm guessing he paid the $5 fine and never gave in his body autonomy. So again, I understand the business aspect. Big Pharma just wants to make the money. What right does the government have to tell you and me and everybody watching and listening that we have to take this injection in our arm or rear end or anywhere else?
It's because the government has bought into the multi-generational indoctrination of vaccines are safe, effective, harmless, and necessary. And when at one point in time, prior to 2015, all 50 states, with the exception of West Virginia and Mississippi, had three types of exemptions. They had a philosophical exemption, which just said, no, thank you, I don't want it. They had a religious exemption, which they can say, my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and it's not going to be contaminated with your dirty, filthy products.
Yeah.
And they had a religious exemption and a philosophical exemption, and the other type of exemption was there was a I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the third type at the
No, it's okay. I'm sure you'll think of it. But there were exceptions in West Virginia.
There were three types of exemptions: philosophical, medical, and religious.
Okay.
And that was the three types: philosophical, medical, and exemption. Medical, you was very difficult to get, and you could only get the vaccine if you had already had a reaction to it. They would give you a medical exemption for that one. So, example, if you had a reaction to an MMR vaccine, you could get a medical exemption to an MMR vaccine, but you didn't get a blanket exemption to all of them. Religious exemption, as I said, it's your body's the temple of the Holy Spirit. You're not going to be contaminated with that stuff. And then a philosophical exemption was just, no, thank you, I didn't want it. Well, by 2015, they were starting to realize that these parents that they labeled vaccine resistant were really beginning to question, like, does my baby need all of these shots? And do they need them all at the same time? Can't we give them one at a time? And when that started happening, the pharmaceutical company went to the state governments, because that's where the laws are. They're state laws, not federal laws, and said, we've got to stop this. We're going to have these horrible outbreaks if these kids don't get vaccinated. And they started taking away our rights to refuse. Now there's only 14 states that have a philosophical exemption. There are 5 states that have no exemptions at all, not a medical or a religious exemption. And that's what the pharmaceutical industry started to do, was to get states to pass laws to say you have to get a shot in order to go to school. And then in COVID, you have to get a shot to be part of society, to keep your job, to travel, to not wear a mask, to all these different things. And so the leverage to get these products into your arm was to not allow you to be part of civil society. And those policies were then passed into laws.
It was disgusting. I mean, people were losing their jobs. People kicked out of the military, so on and so forth. I didn't get the shots. My family didn't get the shots. We didn't know what the hell was in it, so we didn't want to get the shots. And luckily, I was in a job where I worked for myself, and it wasn't going to stop me from being able to support and provide for my family. But it seems to me to be completely and solely and wholly unconstitutional to force people that you can't go to a restaurant without a shot. You can't go to a play. You can't work in the medical industry without a shot. But correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor. I think that there's a silver lining in that they overdid it so much and overstepped so much in COVID. And then we found out that the big lie was that it somehow stopped the spread, which of course it didn't. And it somehow, would kill COVID at the last person who got the shot, which it never did. And they said we'd have a cold, dark, deadly winter for the unvaccinated. We all woke up the next day and said, well, none of that was true. I mean, are you with me that there was somehow a light at the end of the COVID tunnel, that suddenly millions of people around this globe, billions, are questioning Big Pharma?
Yeah, it's actually, I've given it a label, Joe. I call it the gift of COVID. The gifts of COVID.
It's kind of odd to call it that. It's a gift of COVID. Those are like very contrary. Oh, it's almost an oxymoron, but go ahead.
Well, it's a gift of COVID that we learned how dastardly our government was.
Yes.
The gift of COVID that pulled back the curtain, and we found how murderous and deadly our healthcare industry could be. And then we pulled back the curtain and really saw how awful those COVID shots were. We saw so many millions of people that were injured, and equally as many people that were. They now say there's 28 million deaths that have been caused by the COVID shot. And so almost everyone knows someone that has gotten the COVID shot and was either experienced a severe injury or have died from it. And so during COVID, people continued to have babies, and they couldn't go see their doctor either because they were locked down, or their pediatrician wouldn't see them, or they lost their health insurance because they lost their job. And so, these children are growing up. They're now 2.5, 3, 4 years old, and they're completely healthy. They don't have chronic ear infections, asthma, allergies, eczema. They're getting ready to have another baby, and they're going, well, maybe if they're okay and they didn't die without those vaccines, and we learned how horribly bad the COVID jabs were, maybe we should start to more thoroughly examine and question the rest of the injections that are on that schedule. And that's what's happening. And that's why I call that the gift of COVID, that finally people are waking up and pulling their head up and going, what are you injecting in my baby? What is coming through that needle? Do they really need to have fetal bovine serum, cow blood, chicken parts, dog kidney cells, cells from aborted fetal tissue? Do we have to have all that aluminum and all those chemicals like polysorbate 80 that's usually in frostings and used as a flow agent in creams for your skin? Do we really have to have that injected into our children multiple times? And they're starting to read the package inserts. They're looking at the list of chemicals and going, no way. I don't want that injected in my child. In fact, how do I keep my baby healthy without these jabs? Well, let me see. What is measles? It's a fever, a cough, a rash, sometimes some diarrhea, there for 7 to 10 days and goes away and leaves a lifetime of immunity. And all I need to do is vitamin C and vitamin A and support their fever. Well, I think that's a little bit better than getting jabbed with all these chemicals and all this stuff that's in them.
Yeah.
And so parents are really starting to, they're looking at these, instead of looking at vaccines as like a belief system, like, a holier than thou. I believe in vaccines. What's wrong with you? You're a conspiracy nut if you don't believe in vaccines. And starting, we don't say I believe in cars or I believe in airplanes. It's not a religion.
No,
we don't say those things. And so now if we could look at the vaccines like they are a product, like you're going to buy a house or buy a car or buy a new hot water heater for your basement, you look at them as a product, you do the investigation, you find what ones have the safety factors that are in there. They have all the things that you're looking for. Then you negotiate on the price and you can walk away from it if you don't like it. We need to start looking at vaccines like products being injected into our body and understanding what is in that product and whether or not we really need it.
It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. It's Sherri, last name 10 and Penny. Just put them together. Go to drtenpenny.com. Get this book. It's called Zero Accountability in a Failed System, How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. It's a wake-up call. I want you to go and check this out. Interesting comparison to buying another product. I do believe in my water heater, Doc. No, I'm just kidding. But you're right. It's a classic bait and switch is what it is. We were told ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine didn't work, and they do. We were told that zinc doesn't work, and it does. I mean, I had COVID. I was off the air one day. I had zinc, ivermectin, also some steroids for my lungs so I could breathe better, and I was off literally for a day. And I didn't get rid of COVID in a day, but I was able to go to work the next day and got over it very quickly. I probably had it again later on. It just wasn't something I worried about that much once I had the real knowledge from real doctors and real scientists. Why are they allowed to lie that it'll stop transmission? Why are they allowed to lie that COVID comes out at 10 p.m. at bars? Why are they allowed to lie by saying 10 people can gather for Thanksgiving, but not 11, because that's going to end up killing people because of COVID? Why can they lie that these two medicines, hydroxychloroquine, which is used in Africa to keep you safe from malaria, and Africa somehow in those countries that used it had a very low rate of COVID, and ivermectin, which has been like award-winning? Why were they allowed to lie about all this, and is anybody being held accountable?
There is no accountability. And that's why I titled the book Zero Accountability in a Failed System. Think about it. Fauci's still walking around free. Birx is still walking around. Collins is still walking around. All the people at the FDA have moved on to other pharma jobs. I mean, nobody has been arrested, really. I mean, there've been a few people inside of government now that have been charged for things. But for the crimes against humanity and the mass murder that happened from these Fauci shots and what Bill Gates was promoting and all that stuff, nobody has been held accountable. In fact, the mRNA shots are still in the market. Even though there's something like less than 1% are willing to take another booster. I have a friend who has an uncle, and this is a true story, a friend who has an uncle that had 2 shots and 8 boosters.
Wow.
I mean, these deadly products are still on the market, still available. The pediatricians are screaming because they want to give it to children, and the gynecologists are screaming, and obstetricians, because they think it's an important thing for pregnant women to have, even though the results of what has happened from these shots, the infertility, the turbo cancers, the spike protein disease, the myocarditis, insulin-dependent diabetes, renal failure, lack of mentation. I mean, the cognitive decline that has happened from these shots shots is just amazing. But it's a horrible product that's still in the market. So it's beyond just lying about things that really could have been beneficial. It was lying about how bad these shots were. It was lying about the fact that they were effective towards anything. And they had the liability protection of the PrEP Act, which covered countermeasures. And I talk about this a lot in the book, about the PrEP Act that covered all of these products that were used during COVID. They were called covered countermeasures that you couldn't sue for any of them. And that meant the ventilators, the remdesivir, the swabs up your nose, anything that happened to you with the COVID jabs, any of that stuff. It was all protected by a piece of legislation that got passed in the dark of night, literally at 11:30 at night, from in 2005, called the PrEP Act. So they were all covered. Of course they can lie because they have no liability, just like the 19...
Well, Doctor, I'm sorry. They also lied about the EUA status, right? They kept it EUA,
Right.
even though we knew that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine did work, and zinc worked, and other remedies worked. They kept it EUA because you can't have EUA if something else works, right? That status would go away, and in fact, those vaccines would not have been pushed on us because of. Is this why they called it a horse paste? Oh, livestock paste, and Joe Rogan is going to die because he took ivermectin? Is that why they did that campaign like that? Where literally, like, the CDC was showing a woman standing next to a horse saying, "Don't give your family medicine that's for the horse." Is that why? Because EUA would have had to go away by law, right?
Yeah, the FDA violated two of the three parts of a EUA, the emergency use authorization. One is that it has to be an emergent thing that we have to do emergently. The two parts that they violated the first one was that the side effects of the product, meaning the side effects of the vaccine, had to be less than the side effects of if you got the infection. And we know that first and foremost, when they released it, they didn't have enough long-term data to even know that. We know that at the end of the day, deaths from COVID was about 0.2%, and deaths from the COVID jab was in the millions, and the injuries were in the billions globally. Yes. And so they didn't know that. And the third thing was, as you said, the third part of the EUA is that there could be nothing else available on the market that you could use or try instead. So you could use ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin D, zinc. I had found a paper early on in COVID that there were a bunch of pharmacists worldwide that got together and they started looking at all of the products that were out there that were off-label uses that could have helped with the symptoms of COVID.
Right.
And there were like hundreds of products that could have been tried and used, and they were all shut down. No, we can't do any of that. And that's the third. The two of the three tenets of an emergency use authorization were violated from the get-go. The FDA allowed them to do it.
You know, we had somebody in our family that we thought might have had COVID. We happened to be in Michigan at the time. Went to a pharmacy up there, and we actually had a prescription written by a doctor that we have in Kansas that we wanted to get filled in Michigan. And the pharmacist said, "Well, what's this for?" It's for ivermectin. What's the ailment? And they literally looked at my wife. I wasn't there. Looked at my wife and said, "This isn't for COVID, right? Because this doesn't work for COVID." What about that? Were they ill-knowledged when they were at the drugstores, the pharmacies, or were they purposely maybe getting some sort of a kickback by Big Pharma to say these medicines don't work? Because off-label medicines are used all the time. You know that. In fact, the gender transition, medicines that are being prescribed disgustingly to children, those are not for that at all. They're for something very different. So off-label is used a lot. Why do you think the pharmacists pushed back as hard as they did? Right here in San Antonio, where I'm based, there was a pharmacist who announced openly, "I will not fill your prescription for ivermectin." What about that?
So that happened across the country. And I think that there were two things that were happening at that time. I think that pharmacies were being threatened. In fact, I think just recently there was a release of a letter that was sent to the pharmacist about not fulfilling ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine prescriptions unless the doctor could prove that the person had worms. And so they had to prove something like that, because that's what ivermectin was doing. Or they had to prove that they had river blindness, which is what it's used for in India.
Come on.
And so they had to refuse it. I think that they were threatened, and I do think that they were probably also highly compensated. Now, that's just my opinion.
Yes.
Both of those are my opinion. I don't have any, hard, fast proof about that, but it happened nationwide. It was in all of the big retail chains,
Right.
CVS, Walgreens, Drug Mart, all of them nationwide. The only people that would fill ivermectin and or hydroxychloroquine prescriptions were smaller independent compounding pharmacies.
Yeah.
And thankfully there were many of those nationwide. And then people got their medicine from India and Canada and, all over the place in order to get life-saving medications and treatments. It was
so sick.
disgusting.
Well, it was. And also when you walked into those big pharmacies that you mentioned, there would be a gigantic sign, get your COVID shot, get your booster, come wait in line and let us jab you in the arm. And I was like, I can't believe this is really going on. Is Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Go to drtenpenny.com. Go get her book. It's called Zero Accountability in a Failed System, How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. So can the FTC, or the FDA, I should say, not the FTC, that's a different thing completely. The FDA, the CDC, the HHS, the NIH, can they all say today, like, can Bobby Kennedy come out and say all COVID mRNA vaccines should be not sold anymore, take them off the shelves? Can they do it today?
In theory, yes,
Why don't
they
they?
could do that. Well, when you think about what Secretary Kennedy is up against, that he's swimming in a pond filled with rabid, hungry alligators
Yes.
that just literally want to eat him for lunch. And every step that he's taking could be a landmine. So he's fighting senators and congressmen. He's fighting, I think, people that are wanting to stab him in the back,
Yeah.
that are still holdovers in HHS. He's fighting that. He's fighting the probably 100 million people or more out in the U.S. that still believe vaccines are safe and effective. And what do you mean I can't have my vaccine and my COVID shot?
Yeah.
So he's fighting everything on every turn. And Bobby, at his core, he's an attorney. So he's methodically laying out a case to get these things stopped. He knows it. I mean, I've known Secretary Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, for at least 20 years. I've shared a stage with him. I've had dinner with him. We've sold our books together, all sorts of things.
Yes.
And so, he's not going to suddenly get a position inside of HHS and go, oh, vaccines are safe and effective and we got to keep all these things. No, he's doing what he can, moving the ball forward slowly and methodically to get people to start thinking of these things as products and thinking instead of just blindly sitting down and rolling up your sleeve and accepting whatever they want to jab into you.
But I guess the difference is, that was a great answer. The difference is this: it is just a product, like a car, like a water heater. I get that, except the government is telling you have to go get that water heater and you have to go get
That's
that car.
right.
So how do we push back on people in government? I don't know, hypothetically, Elizabeth Warren, who got $850,000 from Big Pharma. How do you push back against somebody who is obviously in the pocket of Big Pharma, who now also has the weight of being a senator or a representative or somebody at a high level that can push for a vote to happen? Yeah, can we do that? Because again, when the government mandates, it's like Obamacare, and I have no idea where you are on the ACA. I think it's horrible. It took over 1/6 of the economy. But the reason why I bring it up is that Obama said, hey, insurance companies, good news. From the president's office, are going to make people go and get your product. And now we couldn't turn it down, or else we're going to face a fine or a fee or maybe jail time if we didn't provide that we had our own health insurance through the exchange or something else. So when the weight of government gets behind it, how do you say no to the product?
You just have to continue to say no. You exercise your right to refuse in the states that you have it, and how you do it, and vote these people out, and show up for committees. Get behind what the MAHA movement is trying to do. For safer food and to get rid of the horrible parts of the vaccines, and no progression of the mRNA or the self-amplifying RNA vaccines. I mean, people just have to get involved. We got the government we deserved, as they say, because we think that going in and checking a box once every 4 years is all we have to do. And so we took our hands off the steering wheel. wheel, took our eyes off the map, and, just went and did our thing and thought that the people down in Washington were acting responsibly and following through with the things we voted for. And that was, like I said, one of the gifts of COVID. We pulled back the curtain on the government, and people were like aghast, like, oh my gosh, I've got to get involved with this.
Right.
And so showing up for the votes, continuing. If you can't go to Washington, D.C., you can make phone calls, you can send faxes, you can get involved with Stand for Health Freedom that sends out hundreds of thousands of emails and texts. And we have moved the ball on things, but it's only when the people get involved, because this country, believe it or not, is still we the people. And we've got 300 million of us and 554 of them. We
Yes.
just have to get involved and stay involved.
It is Dr. Tenpenny. Go to her website. You can find out about her vaccine education courses. It is vcourses.drtenpenny.com, and doctor is DR. Again, vcourses.drtenpenny.com. Go and get her book. It's called Zero Accountability. You can actually go to drtenpenny.com/zero, but it's called Zero Accountability in a Failed System, How Big Pharma Weaponizes Vaccines, Public Health, and the Law. Let me ask you this. That there are several people in my life and several watching and listening that are pregnant, and they're, what should I have my child inoculated with when he or she is born? And I'm like, well, almost nothing, but then again, I'm not a doctor. What would you suggest to somebody who's researched this over the years, and you know that we're being lied to? What would you suggest somebody actually gives their child when they're born?
I would say nothing. The child, God didn't make a mistake. The child wasn't born without an immune system.
Right.
And before vaccines, children still lived, and they, it was, and we've got lots of more skill set now. But I would say the most important thing is when you get pregnant, God gives you two gifts. The first gift is that you were able to get pregnant, and you're going to bring this child into the world that you're going to be responsible for forever.
Yes.
It doesn't just happen at 18, they graduate and you're no longer responsible for them. So that's the first gift. Your first gift was you were able to get pregnant. And the second gift is now you've got somewhere between, 8 and 9 months to 7 and 8 months to get educated. What do I have to be responsible for? What do I have to know about feeding this child and bathing him? How do I get organic this and organic that? And what do I do about these vaccines? You should not be making the decision of whether or not you're going to vaccinate when you are in labor. You have 8 months to read. We have lots of material on our website that's available. There's lots and lots of really good books out there. In fact, one of the best books I advocate for parents who are particularly science-minded, that they want to see the proof and they want to see the references. There's a book called Turtles All the Way Down. Turtles All the Way Down. It's sort of an odd name. It's published by Children's Health Defense. It goes through every single vaccine. And every single illness, tells you what the illness is, what you can expect, what you can do to if your child gets sick with the measles or pertussis, what you can do about that. And then it meticulously goes through all of the individual vaccines so that you can get a full sense of what's going on here and how to take care of your baby without vaccinating him. Joe, I would say that parents who choose to not vaccinate, it's not that they're irresponsible. In fact, if anything, they are more responsible. They're more responsible because they did their homework. They looked around, they decided, and then they have to do things like keep the sugar out of the diet and feed them better and give them vitamins and get them to bed on time.
Yeah.
They're really responsible for their child's health. They're much more responsible if you are choosing to not vaccinate, and you have to navigate the school system, and you have to do all of these things for participatory parenting if you decide to not vaccinate. So it is not a decision to be made lightly. And again, it should not be made when you are in labor. You've got months to think about it. And even if your baby's born, the only reason that they have a vaccine schedule at 2, 4, and 6 months is because it's insurance driven. It's not because your children have to have all of those vaccines on those dates at 2, 4, and 6 months of age, the little tiny precious babies.
Right.
You can always wait. You can wait forever to vaccinate. But once you vaccinate, you really can't unvaccinate. So make the decision carefully and do your homework before you get any of them.
It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Go ahead.
That includes while you're pregnant, because pregnant women now get four vaccines. Research those too. And
Yeah,
so
no,
take time.
I mean, I take your advice. We should research everything before we have a shot in our arm. Again, I'm somebody who resists it anyway. I don't want your metal, needle in my arm, and I don't like needles anyway. But if I don't know what's in it, and if I can't ask questions about it, and I'm somehow shunned from society because I'm asking questions. I was suspended on Twitter because I said hydroxychloroquine works after studies came in proving that. I was slow rolled on YouTube and on Facebook and everything else. It's all sort of now 5 years later starting to lighten up. But they did everything they could to shut people like you and me up. And I hope that people will be loud now because we've got all this information. Dr. Sherri Tenpenny, Sherri is her first name. Last name Tenpenny. Go to drtenpenny.com. Get this book called Zero Accountability in a Failed System. Let me ask you a couple of last questions, and thanks for all the time. And I really appreciate that you doing this book, and I know you sent it to me. I'm going to read it this coming weekend. Should anybody have ever gotten this shot, this so-called COVID shot?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And I said that from the very beginning. It's like, why would you ever allow an experimental product with no long-term studies, and you don't even know what's in it because they were not even telling us what was in it. Why would you allow any experimental product like that be injected in your arm to avoid a respiratory illness?
Yeah.
We've had really bad flu seasons here where, 70, 80,000 people across the country, mostly elderly, have died, but we've had really bad flu seasons. This wasn't even as bad as a bad flu season.
Right.
But yet people were scared to death and ran out the first opportunity to get one of these shots. I said from the very beginning, just wait. You can always get a vaccine,
Yes.
but you can't unvaccinate. And we don't even know what the side effects and the complications are. When the judge ordered Pfizer to release all of those documents, those 900,000 pages of documents, the first tranche of documents that they released, there was one document that was 38 pages long, and towards the end of that, there was 8 pages of single space line across the page that listed more than 1,200 diseases, syndromes, and conditions that they knew the Pfizer shot could cause before it was even released. 1,200. So when people have said to me over these last 5 years since COVID started, do you think the COVID shot could have caused X, fill in the blank? My answer to them is always yes, because it's somewhere in that first 1,200 conditions that we knew about, or some variation of that. And that's the sad part. This was the biggest scam ever perpetrated on humanity, the biggest crime against humanity. And those people who started it and were involved with it and perpetuated it, they need to be held accountable.
I couldn't agree more. It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Go to drtenpenny.com. Get her book called Zero Accountability in a Failed System. Let me ask you about autism. Is there empirical data saying that vaccines don't cause it, or that vaccines do cause it? Because as well as I'm way better than I do, that you've got people who are pro-vax who allege they've got proof there is no connection between vaccinations and autism. I don't believe that. So is there empirical data one way or the other about vaccines and autism?
Yeah, there's lots of it. And those people that would say that, I've got proof that it doesn't cause it. Okay, show me the study.
Yeah.
They can't. They can't. It's just propaganda rhetoric. And, so many studies now have shown that from the ramp up of the vaccine starting in 1991, like we talked about, and each step along the way, that there was another on that chart, that another vaccine was added, and another and another and another. The incidence rate of autism just has continued to rise exponentially, to where we now have the incident rate is 1 in 31 nationwide.
It's crazy.
And 1 in 12 boys in California.
There was never, Doctor, there was never a classmate that I had that had autism, ever, in my entirety of my 12 years in school, in public school, and then in college. I don't remember anybody being autistic. So this is literally from 1991 on, this is where we see the jump.
Right, and they've actually been able to lay over a map from the exponential rise in autism in California started after 2015, and when SB 276 was passed, which took away people's right to refuse, because California before that had a very easy philosophical exemption, and many children had 0 vaccines by the time this law was passed, and they may have been in middle school or high school, and then they had to get the shots. And you could see exponentially where the autism just went right straight up after that was implemented. And there are lots of studies. There's a book that I just reviewed last week called Vax, V-A-X, Vax, Unvax, Let the Science Speak.
Yeah.
It was co-written by Secretary Kennedy and Dr. Brian Hooker. And you can just skim through that book. I have it in an ebook fashion, and you can just skim down the page. It's so disheartening to see every vaccine that was analyzed and so many different conditions like asthma and Guillain-Barré syndrome and seizure disorders. If they compared a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study or unvaxxed set of children,
Right.
the number of the incidence rate of the vaccinated, as they were unhealthy by a magnitude of 1.5 to 2.5 to 3.5 times more illness amongst the vaccinated than amongst the unvaccinated. And it was just it's just disheartening to see graph after graph after graph that they had found 60 studies. And it's kind of an interesting story because at the time, Bobby Kennedy called Brian and said, can you find all the studies that really have a pure unvaxxed cohort in the studies for comparison? And Dr. Hooker had told me, oh, I'll just do this over a week. And I'm sure there's not more than 3 or 4. Well, then they found more and more and more until they found 60. And this was before COVID, 60 different studies that had a purely unvaccinated group in the study to compare against a vaccinated group. And the charts and the graphs that come out of that, when you see it, and that book is designed to be a manual to take to your pediatrician and say, look at this. This is irrefutable. This is published data, and it included autism and asthma and allergies and eczema and seizure disorders and all of those things.
It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Go to drtenpenny.com and get her book, drtenpenny.com/0 to find out more. Let me finish with this. I think you're very much like I am. I think Laura Logan, who is our mutual friend, is like us as well. We're very inquisitive, so we want to find out both sides. Before I go into a debate about politics, I know the left side, I know the right side, probably know the left side better than they know it, so that I can argue why I think I'm correct. Do you know what it is that the pro-vax side has been saying about there being no connection between autism and vaccines? Are they just saying it? Were they citing anything whatsoever, anything anecdotal or empirical? Because they will shout you in your face, will shout you down that there's no connection when what you just said is there's proof that there is. Do you know what they're saying?
It's, they will go out of their way, and there's proof of that. That they will go out of their way to absolutely say that vaccine injury isn't connected to anything.
Right.
Yes. You can't prove that you got a shot and then you got chronic ear infections or that you got asthma or anything. It's like safety is the least of their concerns, and they really aren't interested in it. And they're really not. If they say you can't prove any of that, you can't prove that vaccines caused anything.
So their stance is you can't prove it,
and because we know vaccines are safe and effective. Period. We've set up so many different. There have been at least 3 that I've been involved with that we were going to have an on-stage debate of pro-vaccine people versus anti-vaccine people.
Yes.
And it was going to be moderated, and people were we were going to get sets of questions in advance. So there was no gotcha questions, and you could, have each person got a number of minutes, was moderated by a professional moderator, and was set up on stage to be able to tell the audience, here's what we think, and here's what the pro-vaccine people think.
Yes.
And now you, audience, you can decide. And every time that we have set that up, and I've been involved in at least 3 of those, every single time, Joe, when it got down to the wire, the pro-vaccine people wouldn't show up. And their excuse was, there's nothing to debate here. The science is settled. We're right. They're wrong. We're right. They're wrong. And if we engage in a debate, then we are kind of saying that they have something worthy of debating. So we're not going to show up and talk to it and debate it. And that's happened many times, at least 3 times that I know of over the years. So they just stand on safe and effective, that's it. I mean, there's another book that really goes into detail about that. It's called Vaccines Amen by Aaron Siri. And he goes into a lot of detail about the religion of vaccines. And it's very well written, and it's 10 years worth of as an attorney and doing depositions and investigating all these things. And so there's so much good material out there now, and that people should read and can feel very confident in their decision if they decide that I'm not injecting that stuff in my body or in my babies, that they've got a lot of backup to back up the position that they've chosen.
Yeah, Aaron was on the show, and he's very, very smart, and I'm glad that he wrote the book as well. It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Sherri is Sherri. Tenpenny is 10 and penny. Go to dr10penny.com/0. Find out about zero accountability in a failed system, how Big Pharma weaponizes vaccines, public health, and the law. It is certainly a wake-up call, and I want everybody to go and get that. I think that your advice has been amazing today, and the information that you give is great as well. I keep saying last question, but let me finish with this. As we hear about monkeypox and the bird flu times 9 and everything else, they always want us to have some sort of fear of infectious disease. Is it your opinion it's just so the Big Pharma can keep their grips in us? Because I've ignored most of this garbage that comes out, and I even ignored whatever the treatment they said I had to get before getting COVID. So I feel healthier for it. I think my family's healthier for it. But is that the ongoing game by Big Pharma? Let me keep you reliant on me. Look, there's something that happened in Sudan that you've got to worry about now because there was one case in Paducah, Kentucky.
That's it. And that's one of the things that I talk about in detail in my book, is that they have set up they've developed a template that started probably in about 1976 with the swine flu campaign in 1976. And they use that template periodically moving forward with the weaponization of fear to keep it. And they've perfected it. And each time it's a market test. So they push forward with all this fear and all this stuff that's going to happen. And then people go, I don't know. And they start, questioning it. And then they back off and it disappears. I mean, where'd COVID go?
Yeah.
Where'd it go? Where did it go? It's just gone. And in that period of time when they fall back, they're evaluating what didn't work, what should we do, and what should we do less of. And what they always come up with, what they should do more of, is the fear. The more scary that they can make it, and the more fear that they can choke people out with, they will do that. And that's, in the book, I was just a little plug here. I'll say for that, there's something in that book for everybody. If you've been in this campaign and you've been following this like you are, very knowledgeable, and have been around this for a very long time, you're still going to find things that you didn't know in there. Good. And that if you're brand new to the topic, you're really going to be eye dropped. You're really going to be surprised. Dr. Suzanne Humphreys wrote the foreword on the book, and Suzanne and I are kind of like the two vaccine queens that talk about it more than just about anybody. Right. And she said, I thought I knew all this stuff until I read your book. She said, I was really surprised at the stuff that I thought I knew, but you put it in a way, or you described it differently, or added things out. So there's something in there for everybody. Good. Everybody should go and get it. Zero accountability in a failed system. How Big Pharma weaponizes vaccines, public health, and the law. You've got to get it. It's Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. Go to dr10penny.com/0 to find out more. Doc, thanks a million for coming on. Great knowledge. I can't wait to read the book, and we should do it again sometime, okay? That sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you.